Laurie, I would love to pass it over to you to introduce yourself and kick us off.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. And hello, everyone from chilly, snowy New York, Long Island to be specific. Although I can't complain too much, knowing that my dear friends in Texas and really across the Midwest, kind of everywhere these days, dealing with such crazy weather. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Laurie Henneborn, and I am thrilled to be joining you all during this fantastic webinar. I am a white woman with blonde hair, hazel eyes, wearing a light brown sweater with an olive green background sitting behind me. So I am a managing director at Accenture, which is a leading global professional services firm. I lead research and thought leadership development focused on raising awareness and taking actions pertaining to disability inclusion and equality in the workplace. To that end, I led the research for the study you'll hear about today, and also for the 2018 Getting to Equal Disability Inclusion Advantage study, which was a collaborative effort along with Disability In and American Association of People with Disabilities, or AAPD. I'm on the board of directors for the AAPD and sit on the Disability Inclusion Global Advisory Council at Accenture. Finally, I am especially passionate about coaching and mentoring colleagues with invisible disabilities, drawing from my own experience since being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2004. So let's turn to the next slide. It has been so exciting to launch this new study, our second major thought leadership that is focused on disability inclusion, and this time on such a global stage. And it's really because of all of the hard work that went into shaping such a robust inclusion and diversity research program sponsored by our CHRO, Ellen Shook, not to mention the partnership that we've had with our amazing global I&D organization. As you can see here, we've been on a journey with this Getting to Equal program, which traditionally focused on the critical gender equality issue. But this year we had the opportunity to incorporate several what I call pillars of diversity. And this was possible due to a truly multifaceted survey of 30,000 employees from almost 30 countries that we conducted in 2019. And from this core survey, led by my colleagues Barbara Harvey and Dom King in Accenture Research, we've been able to release the core Getting to Equal report earlier in 2020, but also chapters for the Pride season, and now with results from 6,000 employees and nearly 700 executives with disabilities. We have this study focused on the role of culture for disability inclusion. And it's titled Enabling Change, which, and we launched it in time for International Day for Persons with Disabilities in December. And ultimately, all of this powerful content and these insights aim to confirm Accenture's passion and position on inclusion and diversity in its broadest sense, while delivering an understanding of the tangible actions that our clients can take to advance along their own journeys. So what we'll do is I'll give you a quick overview of the research itself, kind of like those highlights. If you want to advance the slide, it'll just give the agenda. So let's look at the research overview and those key messages, then we'll dive into the detailed findings, and then we'll be open for some Q&A. So again, here's the overarching storyline. What is it? What emerged? So persons with disabilities represent about 15%, that's 1 billion people, the world's population. But their participation in the workforce, as we all know, is disproportionately low. It's estimated that across the world, close to 80% of persons with disabilities are not employed. In most developed countries, the official unemployment rate for persons with disabilities of working age is at least twice those who have no disability. But what about those of us who are in the workforce? Are we as a community confident in our roles and in the contributions that we're making? Are we feeling supported? Are we thriving? And is the culture of the organization in which we work enabling a more diverse, inclusive workforce overall? Accenture's research suggests that, in fact, organizations are at risk of seeing wasted talent among this community of aspirational employees who want to and do love their jobs. We love working, but are more likely by 1.5 times or just over 60% more likely to feel excluded in the workforce and lack a sense of achievement, a sense of confidence in terms of the contributions we're making. All such important criteria for an individual to be and to feel engaged, and change is certainly needed. But our research revealed that achieving real, meaningful change is hampered by two things. First is the lack of transparency and trust, where we have strong evidence that a vast majority of employees and leaders alike, 77 and 81% respectively, are not disclosing their disabilities at work. And second, which is not highlighted here, but it is discussed in the report, and we'll talk a bit about it here. It's this lack of urgency to change, which is likely driven by the gap you'll see in how supportive the leaders believe their culture is versus what the employees actually experience. In fact, a mere 20% of the employees with disabilities that we surveyed feel their organization is fully committed to supporting them, a mere 20%. What we conclude is that culture is the key that will unlock the door to a thriving disability workforce and to growth for the organizations that get this right. In fact, we found that a 50% boost to engagement is possible if the culture is as equal and inclusive as the top 10% in our sample. And so what's the correlation of all of this to financial outcomes for the companies who get it right? Well, we were able to unearth this as well by focusing on the organizations that identified and actively focused on helping employees with disabilities to thrive. The result was that these organizations, and it worked out to roughly 250 of our sample, so about 15% of all the for-profit companies that were represented through our survey. These companies are growing sales and profits faster than their peers by nearly 3 times and 4 times, respectively. And then our thought leadership then concludes with the 8 actions that executives can take today to raise the engagement of employees with disabilities. So those are the highlights. Let's dig into those detailed findings now. So let's advance to the next slide. And first, it is important to ground the research in the scale of disability and how employment is trending around the world, that this is not a niche issue. Persons with disabilities represent about 15%. Again, that's about 1 billion of the world's population. And it's important not to forget that 80% of disabilities emerge when people are of working age, like me. I was about 5 years into my employment with Accenture when I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. It was about 2 years after my son was born. So it means that any of us could acquire a disability at any time. It's not a matter of them, but it's a matter of all of us. It's not a niche issue. And participation in the workforce, again, disproportionately low. It's estimated that across the world, close to 80% of persons with disabilities are not employed, and in most developed countries, that official unemployment rate of persons with disabilities of working age is at least twice that of those with no disability. Next slide. And of course, right, what's a presentation these days without talking about COVID? So COVID-19 has absolutely exacerbated the employment gap. While the pandemic has shown us that remote working and reasonable accommodations at scale are possible, this hasn't been the case for persons with disabilities whose economic and employment prospects have certainly worsened. As a matter of fact, Accenture ran a COVID-19, what we call the COVID-19 impact survey, which included, I think, almost 2,000 persons with disabilities across 7 countries. We found that the proportion of employees with disabilities confident in their job, confident in their income security, fell from 73% to 40% in the 6 months prior to August 2020. Next slide. So persons with disabilities are less likely to be in paid employment than their peers. But what of those who do make it into employment? Well, the harsh reality is that they are less likely to thrive than their peers when they get there. What we found from our survey, and here you'll see it in the top dark purple bars, is that employees with disabilities are 27% less likely to feel included in the workplace compared with the average. And by included, we mean that they feel like a key component of their team with real influence over decisions. And they're 60% more likely to feel excluded. And you can see that lighter block, at the foot of the chart. And by excluded, we mean ignored or with no voice in their team. So the bottom line here, employees with disabilities less likely to feel included, more likely to feel excluded. Next slide. Let me make sure. Okay. So the next question is, why do employees with disabilities feel excluded or undervalued? What are some of the reasons? So one issue we uncovered was there is a lack of transparency and trust in workplaces, the sense that employees don't feel safe opening up about disabilities that they may have. From employee interviews conducted around the globe, we found that there are consistent fears around things like retaliation, slower progression, less meaningful roles. And what we find from our survey is some of these challenges or barriers that surface. So, for example, 77% of employees with disabilities say it's important for them to have the freedom to be the same person at work as they are at home. And you shift to the chart on the right-hand side of the slide, and the top bar labeled, employees, you see that just 24% of employees with disabilities are fully open with colleagues about their disability. So there's a clash there. If we want to be the same person at work, then surely we should be able to bring our whole selves to work and to tell others about who we are as individuals, even about our disabilities. And you can see on the left there that 71% say that seeing a senior role model is important for them to thrive. Shifting back to the right-hand side and looking at the top of the left-hand bar, that's the portion of executives who are fully open. So executives are even less transparent about their disabilities, just 20% fully open, denying employees with disabilities these role models to allow them to thrive, to feel confident in the workplace. I'm an example here where I was lucky enough to have an executive role model with disabilities who was my mentor. Moving on to the next slide. And that point about feeling safe is brought out strongly by this chart. In fact, across a range of indicators, we see leaders overestimating how safe employees feel raising sensitive issues. For example, 84% of executives believe their employees feel safe about being open about a physical disability. And this drops to just 65% of the employees agreeing. And you'll see a very similar pattern emerging as you go down that chart related to mental health challenges, being open about a neurological condition. There's a big perception reality gap, which leads to this lack of urgency that I mentioned earlier. Why should executives change if they believe their organization is doing such a good job for their employees with disabilities and giving them that safe environment? Moving to the next slide. And here we are again with the perception gaps presented on this slide. So through our survey, we asked executives and employees alike about whether they feel the workplace they operate in enables them to thrive in terms of having the right technology, environment, support. 67% of executives say, yes, this is what we do. But that drops to just 41% of the employees who agree. Next slide. And perhaps even more worrisome is what we saw when asking employees with disabilities across a number of dimensions how committed they feel their employer is to helping them to advance, to thrive within that workforce, within that workplace. Ultimately, it's just 20%, 1 in 5 employees who feel that their employer is fully committed to helping them to thrive and succeed. So there's a lot of improvement, a lot of room for improvement here. Let's move on. So that's the context for what our survey tells us about the situation in the workplace. Pretty sobering, right? What executives perceive, what employees actually experience. So we wanted to take it further. We wanted to unearth the lessons to be learned from those environments in which employees with disabilities are thriving. So again, we focused on the responses from the almost 6,000 employees with disabilities to assess levels of what we call human potential, what we more commonly would refer to as engagement, right? And when we talk about human potential or engagement, what we really mean in this study, and this is important, it's around 2 things. One is around their career satisfaction. So are they satisfied with their roles, with their career? What do they aspire to do going forward? Do they aspire to senior leadership, for example? And the second is the sense of confidence and belonging, their ability to give their best to their organization. Are they comfortable raising issues, asking questions, being open about who they are, what they want to do, freedom to innovate, these sorts of things? And we took that sense of employment and that sense of employee or human potential and set that against 200 workplace culture factors that we have consistently reviewed for the last few years, again, as we've been on this journey of, with the Getting to Equal and the Culture of Equality research. And we were mapping one factor against the other. And the idea of this is to say which factors, which characteristics of the workplace culture have a significant and positive effect on employee potential. And what this allowed us to do is identify those factors which positively and significantly influence thriving among employees with disabilities. And once we had those in place, we were able to also identify the workplaces at the very top, so the top 10%, where these key workplace culture factors were most common. And we refer to these as the more equal cultures. Next slide. I always feel like there should be a drum roll here, but these are the 8 culture factors which our model shows have a positive and significant impact on the likelihood of an employee with a disability to thrive in the workplace. Remember, by thriving, we mean their career satisfaction, their aspirations, their sense of confidence and belonging. Now, there's no sense of causality here, right? That putting these factors in place will absolutely lead to more employees with disabilities thriving. But what our model does is it shows the likelihood of these factors being present in an organization where these individuals are thriving. And our study reveals examples of companies globally which stand out for each of these factors, such as we use Accenture's example of our own Thriving Minds program, which we created in partnership with Stanford Medicine and Thrive Global to focus on better understanding the impact of stress and steps that we can all take to build resiliency. And I personally love the Lemon Trees Hotels example, where this hotel chain in India, which has a rigorous and comprehensive training program in place for employees, all employees, and it ultimately raises both understanding and skills pertaining to a variety of disabilities. For example, all new recruits must take an introductory sign language class in order to communicate with not just their non-hearing colleagues, but also their customers. Next slide. Now, yeah, you will have noticed, right, that the 8 culture factors that we have identified through this study, they're quite general. They're not obviously disability specific at face value. But again, at Accenture, we know there is an important layer that sits over the top of these factors to maximize the likelihood of employees with disabilities thriving in the workplace. And we talk about them in, for example, some of our past reports. We had the Disability Inclusion Advantage. We had a report that focused on accessibility. So yes, these relate to digital accessibility and workplace accommodations. And you can see on this slide a list of Accenture related initiatives that we've been so passionately pushing right into our organization and discussing even with our clients. The contrast with our research and how this fits into our research is that what we sought to do was uncover some less obvious factors. And you look at the things on and the ideas that are initiatives that are on the screen now and what Accenture has put into place, and you can say, yes, right? I can see why this makes sense for our employees with disabilities. What else is there? What are the other things that work for one group or the group as a whole and can work for others? And this is important that we pinpoint factors that help everyone, because we know from interviews that we've conducted that many employees with disabilities, myself, right? We don't want to be singled out for special treatment. We simply want a level playing field so we can thrive at the same level and pace as our peers. So maybe here is a good time to also pause and highlight other ways that Accenture is addressing the 8 culture factors that have been highlighted in the study. Since I believe, Sarah, that may have come through some of the questions, or maybe it was through a conversation I was having with you in preparation for this webinar. I believe I already mentioned, in the area of role models, right? I had my own personal experience working with our global disability inclusion sponsor, who unfortunately just retired, but such a great person, Chad Jardee. He's actually now the chairman for Disability In. But Chad, amputee, just amazing mentor and coach, such a humble man. Beyond Chad, we've had our global CEO, Julie Sweet, very publicly stating how personal disability inclusion is for her and about our goals, right? And that, we are on this journey to inclusion. And she actually just recently developed a YouTube video in support of the Are You In campaign. Again, a campaign run through Disability In and the AAPD in support of the Disability Equality Index. So, we'd love to see this, especially senior leadership standing out, talking about disability inclusion and how very important it is, and about our key initiatives. We have, in the area of flexible work, I work a 4x10 week, a compressed work week. And it is so important for me due to all of the, I do also have caretaker responsibilities. My father has Parkinson's, but beyond that, it's also so that I can take care of myself, right? And all the doctor's appointments that pop up every now and again. But so that's the flexible work arrangements. We have job sharing, we have part-time work schedules that we offer. Of course, we have our incredible employee resource groups, which we can talk about. We have our Persons with Disabilities Champions program. I believe we're up to almost, I think we're between 37,000 and 38,000, persons with disabilities champions across 52 countries. So those are just some other examples as we looked at, across those culture factors of, what Accenture is doing in this space. Let's move on to the next slide. The final piece, right, is around what employees with disabilities stand to gain and what do organizations stand to gain when these 8 factors are in place. And in terms of employees with disabilities, we see major differences to employee engagement if we compare the best workplaces, again, that top 10% where the 8 factors are most common, with the worst workplaces, that would be the bottom 10%. And you could see big increases in engagement levels. So 50% higher in the most disability inclusive workplaces, comparing top workplaces again with those lower down. And you can see here 2 other related areas where we broke that down into stronger career satisfaction and aspirations and a higher sense of confidence and belonging, all correlated to those factors. So this is what our model suggests employees gain in the best organizations. Let's move on. And in terms of the commercial benefits, the business case, as it were, well, we know that there are a range of studies that have shown that teams are more productive, innovative, right, when employees are engaged. And we talk about some of these, or list some of these in the report itself. Our survey analysis goes further to show that companies led by executives who are focused on disability engagement, again, among that top 10%, are growing sales nearly 3 times and profits 4 times faster than their peers. So I think, Sarah, I'll wrap it there. Oh, that gives us a lot of time for Q&A. I'll wrap it there. But what I would love to encourage is for you to please reach out with any questions, opportunities to present this further to your teams. Absolutely happy to do that. And I've also included a link to the study itself here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Laurie. And we have received a number of questions, so I am just going to stop sharing really quick so we can get to these. A couple of questions that we have received. One is about, we're talking about inclusion, and inclusion to me really also means, what are you doing to create an equitable process, an equal opportunity for individuals, especially individuals with disabilities who might need things like assistive technology to access, whether that be a document as an employee or an assessment during the hiring process or the interview process. So one of the questions that we received has to do with that innovative technology. You know, are you aware of any other research areas around innovative technology and the impact of that in creating this type of inclusive experience and culture for people with disabilities?
Yeah, so I could be opening some debate here, but I have to say, one area that I'm personally very excited about and keeping an eye on is the potential of artificial intelligence, right? Artificial intelligence, though, that is used ethically and responsibly to bolster accessibility and the wildly innovative assistive technology for that is possible for persons with disabilities. And I want to stress the words ethically and responsibly, because there is a very necessary balance that must be achieved when exploring, developing, adopting this technology. You have to balance the innovation and the process and the promise with the potential unintended consequences, right, that can be experienced if bias creeps in. And this is why Accenture is taking a good look, right? We're taking inclusive, human-centered design very seriously, and even working with partners to establish what we think, at least from a commercial stance, right, is a first of its kind set of guiding principles, along with multi-stakeholder guidelines, right, for developing, adopting, et cetera, AI that works for versus against persons with disabilities in the workforce. And this is very relevant, right, especially when you think about talent acquisition, recruiting, the hiring process. So, when you consider technology that describes people and text and objects aloud for those with low vision, and similar AI-powered tools and apps, and there's one I read about recently called Waymap, which seeks to help those with visual impairments to navigate their travel and work environments more independently. There are tools that allow people with mobility issues to operate the computer via eye movements. I mean, technologies like these can really help to improve the lives of employees with disabilities. But again, there's that balance, right? You need to make sure it's being done ethically and responsibly. So that's just one area, Sarah, that I know I personally am diving into more and more these days.
I couldn't agree with you more there. I think especially that emphasis that you just had on responsibly and ethically. There are so many concerns around AI and just what bias is potentially built into that. How do we leverage AI, one, to stay competitive, but also to make everybody's lives that much more efficient,
Yeah.
easier, really help to get people into the door that much faster within our organizations with high applicant volumes as well. But I think that ethical part is so crucial to these developments around AI. So I'm excited to learn more, especially as you continue to research that. Another question for you. I know you touched on this, of course, throughout the presentation, but thinking this might be a good opportunity to just summarize some of what you said. And how do you measure an inclusive culture? There's
Mm-hmm.
obviously even that difference. I know you and I have talked about a lot, the difference between diversity versus inclusion. And so many times, especially now, we're just lumping those two words together and everything is D and I, or even I and D. But
Right.
is there that true understanding of the difference between diversity and inclusion? So, for example, you might have a diversity hiring program
Mm-hmm.
that's strictly for diversity and for representation, which it's still absolutely needed within organizations, but it takes that extra step now for how are those individuals included within their teams, their new teams, within conversations, being invited to have a seat at the table, having that feeling of belonging as well. That's the inclusion part. How are we retaining those individuals and giving them that true sense? So, from this research that you did, um, what else can you really just summarize as measuring that inclusive culture?
So sure. So um, while this study, right, focuses on those factors that influence an employee's engagement, right, and their ability to thrive, I think it's safe to say that they also underpin that broader culture of equality, right? When we define a culture of equality at Accenture, and our CEO has been very, out front about this as well, is that culture is one which has things like bold leadership, right? A diverse leadership team that will share and measure equality targets and share those openly, right? And again, our own CEO has said openly that disability inclusion is very personal for her. She's shared that through major global platforms like the World Economic Forum. She's talked about our goals, our action plan, and measuring progress. But she also acknowledges that we're not perfect. No one's perfect in this space, right? We all have so much more to do. So that's bold leadership. Then there's the providing an empowering environment. And this is one that trusts employees, respects individuals, offers freedom to be creative and to train and to work flexibly. And then finally, we talk about this idea of taking comprehensive action, right? So policies, practices that are disability friendly, family friendly, support equally all people, regardless of background, gender, disability, et cetera, and are bias free, right, in attracting and retaining people. So, at Accenture, and I just heard Julie mention this in a call yesterday, we believe that what gets measured gets done, right? And internally, I know we have increased our focus on engagement levels. We have our global, people survey efforts, of course, but we don't just do it and walk away from it, right? We talk about it as a leadership team, look in detail at our results, see where we have to do better, not only broadly, Sarah, but also in particular levels, right? But amongst our people, right? So and all of this is especially important when you think about the impacts of COVID, right? Both professionally and personally upon our people. in addition to measuring engagement levels across the board, we have scorecarding efforts in place that will measure, for example, how we're doing on things like employment, skilling and training efforts, participation in disability initiatives, et cetera. And from an external perspective, we recognize that, again, we're not perfect. So we participate in benchmarking efforts, such as that Disability Equality Index that I mentioned earlier. That's the tool from Disability and the AAPD. As a matter of fact, excuse me, again, over the past, I think, few days, we had that video released, which was our way of exclaiming that, Accenture is all in, we're all in for disability inclusion, and to also encourage other companies, to participate in this powerful benchmarking activity as well.
Yeah, and I think exactly to your point, measuring engagement is one really key way that you can measure how included maybe your team members feel, and specifically even gauging, and it might not necessarily be a direct measurement, but you can gauge, especially if you are a manager or if you are within a smaller team, to be able to recognize that, are there individuals that maybe didn't participate as much before, and now there's an increase in participation? And so engagement, meaning participation that way, maybe in a group setting, maybe one-on-one, all the different ways that you can interact with individuals. Is there an increase in productivity? Is there an increase in their willingness to share more, even personally? And you can really start that too, by sharing more about yourself and really just opening up the conversation to show that, hey, you're trying to create this culture where we do talk about ourselves as people first, and we do know each other as employees, as team members, co-workers, as managers, but we're getting to know each other as people as well. And that might not be necessarily what your company has always done. So it can take some time to implement that on your team, but there's no wrong time to start that. You don't have to dive right into it and, start to share something really super personal or vulnerable about yourself, but you can recognize and say, hey, I recognize that we haven't done a lot of this. We haven't had these types of conversations a lot in the past. And here's why it's really important to me that at least we start to do that. And here's what I want for our team. So, yeah. And going along with that, I know you and I have talked about a lot, just how to even start to create that inclusive culture by taking a look at all the different groups that exist within your organization. So employee resource groups, colleague resource groups, business resource groups. If done right, those are a great resource for you, especially if you are in a management or leadership position, somebody who is responsible for gauging the current level of inclusion for a particular group. So for example, I know that our organization has a employee resource group for people with disabilities. And so a suggestion is, even if you have a corporate-wide survey, an employee engagement survey that goes out every year, you don't necessarily have the luxury of diving in deep and asking, how do you feel the level of inclusion is for people with disabilities? And then to, of course, equally mention every other group as well. You're mainly just gauging, usually through those surveys, overall feel for senior leadership and for the company. But you can then take an opportunity to survey the employee resource group. Let it be known that it's confidential information. Let it be known what the data is being used for, but take that as an opportunity to go to this group of people with disabilities or caregivers and allies and ask, do you feel that it's an inclusive place for people with disabilities? If not, why? Or what has your experience been? So Laurie, I would love your thoughts on, Accenture has so many business resource groups, employee resource groups. Can you speak to that topic a little bit more as well, on how Accenture has leveraged those groups and best practices?
Yeah, so first I will say that everything you just said is incredibly powerful when you think about how you can extend the value of those ERGs, right? So one thing I didn't mention earlier on, was that I'm also the co-executive sponsor for our Metro New York Disability ERG. And just through that experience, and here I would focus on the power of connecting, communicating, right, to share experiences and stories, and to ultimately build awareness and generate empathetic, inclusive teams and leadership, right? That's to say that ERGs are not, I don't feel, right, ERGs are not going to fulfill their promise if you don't get your people talking to each other. If you're setting calls, maybe we've all been on them, right? If you're setting calls only to talk to your ERG members, it's going to frustrate your membership. If you're not inviting other ERGs to your discussions and engaging in truly intersectional dialogue, right, then you're missing something there as well. And so I know at Accenture, you know, we're leveraging our ERGs in these ways, but we're also increasingly, I would say, tapping into our membership, not only for what you've mentioned, Sarah, right, which is to give us that very specific insight that we need to make sure that we are doing what we need to do, and we have the initiatives in place, and our people feel included, and they have the support and the technology, right, that they need. But we're also using and leveraging their many talents and skills and lived experiences that, you know, we can bring to bear on client engagements. That's so exciting, right? So, you know, in this way, we can ensure that we're taking that human-centered, inclusive approach to even what we're delivering to our clients.
Absolutely. And an additional question that we received related to this is, if companies want to survey employees, especially with regard to perspectives of leadership, so that perception versus reality, because I think that is so powerful. I think, of course, to a degree that exists within every organization, but not every organization knows how to talk about that. And now through this research, you've kind of opened the door to at least bring up the topic to say, hey, I saw this research, or, you know, I attended this webinar, I would like to talk about this too. But if you want to conduct a survey like that within your own organization, how can you ensure honest, reliable answers? Because not everyone might feel safe to give that type of information. So do you have any suggestions there?
I mean, the only suggestion I have is drawing from, again, right, my own experience. I don't have the expertise, right, of the participants in this call when it comes to, you know, HR functions and such. So what I will tell you is that confidence, the sense of confidence and openness, right? It's not like a switch that gets flipped overnight. You have to lead your people along a journey to getting to that point, right, where they feel confident, where they know that there won't be any retribution, even if it's just something that they're, you know, that the fear, right, exists, the insecurities exist. And for us, that journey started several years ago when I started. It was like a steady drum. It was a slight drum beat, Sarah, but it was a steady drum beat around the importance of being truly human, you know, transparency, bringing your whole self to work. And then we had a major global focus on, and some of you may have seen the video, because it kind of went viral, like our Inclusion Starts With I campaign, where all of a sudden we're meeting as teams, right? I'll never forget the day I had our team in the New York office. It was probably 20, 25 of us in a big conference room. Oh, we could be in the office. I miss it. Drawing up our own posters or postcards of what inclusion means to us, and sharing very personal stories. For the first time, I worked with these colleagues, but some of them I had worked with them for, you know, probably 15 or so years. And so that was the kind of journey we were on. And I don't think I mentioned it so far, but I kept my disability a secret for 13 years, right? I didn't disclose. But it was through this this increasing culture of inclusion and this drumbeat that just got louder and louder and higher in terms of our leadership, that eventually made me realize I am doing not only myself a disservice because of all of the anxiety that was developing and in me, and even some of the frustrations I was starting to feel, right? When maybe events weren't or didn't feel as inclusive as they should. Well, why would they? They had no idea, right, that I couldn't handle extreme cold like we're experiencing now, or extreme heat in the summer. And so, I think I'll just go back to just make sure that you are appreciating the role of that journey, appreciating the role of your leaders in all of this, and just leading your people toward that confidence.
Mhm. And adding on to that, I think it's so powerful for you to share that story where you work for an organization that has this reputation of creating an inclusive workplace, prioritizing people with disabilities, providing accommodations that obviously didn't happen overnight. That took a lot of time. But even with all of that strong messaging, of course, there's still I'm a person and here's how I feel and I can't help but how I feel. So there is a level of,
Yeah.
yeah, it is a very personal decision, and you're never obligated to share that type of information about yourself. But, adding on to what you said, to answer the question, the only other things that I can think of from an employer standpoint are: one, emphasize if the data is going to be kept confidential. But more than that, what I think speaks volumes is if employees start to see feedback that they've given being implemented and the organization is actually taking action on that. Because I'll fully admit I've taken surveys before from organizations and it says it's kept confidential, and sometimes I wonder, is it really kept confidential? Maybe the leader doesn't get it, but someone can see that it came from me. Or I want to be really honest, really blunt about something, of course, in a professional way, but at the same time, maybe it won't be perceived well because I don't know if this is what they want to hear. But if you start to see that the organization is, one, communicating that it is being taken seriously, and here is the roadmap for how they're now going to utilize that data and showing that they are following up on it. It's not just they asked for your input and then you never hear from them again, or you only hear from them once or twice, but it's followed up on throughout the year. And if you have the ability to start to implement some of those changes, if you can take action, it's the action speaks louder than words in certain cases sometimes. For inclusion, I think it's 50-50 to a degree. But if you can, of course, implement those changes, I think that will build trust along the way as well, and further encourage your employees to be honest, because they'll see that their opinion was valued, and they were listened to as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Another question we received is, what is something in the hiring process that you feel is often overlooked, causing accessibility concerns? Or, I'll expand on that, even for people with disabilities, how you can be more inclusive there.
Yeah. So, such a good question. I mean, maybe I'll be a little selfish here, but in my humble opinion, I think invisible disabilities, right, is something that's often overlooked. We don't know what we don't know, which is why accessibility really needs to become what I guess I would call a no-brainer capability, right, embedded within the organization's culture and way of operating. As I mentioned in my presentation, it's estimated that I think it's 80% of us will experience some form of disability while we're in the workforce. So we need to ensure that we're putting accessible tools, products, and services in place proactively in order that our employees are not left behind or forced to deal with these barriers through their career journey.
And going along with that, the question is COVID-19. How do you feel COVID-19 has really even just shifted the virtual, with the shift to virtual work, how has that impacted people with disabilities and their experiences in trying to find employment?
Yeah, yeah. Um, so I think I shared some of the data, right, from last year's COVID survey during my presentation, and that was related to job security. But um, in before COVID-19, the US was seeing an increase in labor force participation among persons with disabilities. In February of 2020, for example, right, I think we were at 31% of persons with disabilities who could work, and that's between the age of 16 and 64, they were employed, compared to 75% of those without disabilities. That was an increase of 2% from the fall of 2018, when I was working on that business case research, right? And that study was launched. But since then, the economic and health impacts of COVID-19, I mean, it can't be understated. They've wiped out those gains and then some. I believe the data was just recently released, right, for January, the update from the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and we stand now at 28, it's a little over 28.5% of persons with disabilities employed, which is probably around 4 million, ages 16 to 64. So there's just no doubt that, they've been disproportionately impacted. I actually wrote a LinkedIn article, I think it was early summer last year, that talks about, the lasting lessons from the pandemic, and how, persons with disabilities, employees with disabilities, we know how to work remotely, right? We know we get it, and so, there are certainly lessons that can, should, and probably are being leveraged from this incredible pool of talent from us. So I hope that answers the question. I don't have all the labor force participation statistics in front of me, but I was just recently looking at the business case and trying to update some of that. So
Yeah.
that's what I have on hand.
No, I absolutely. I think you did answer the question, and exactly to the point that you just said. People with disabilities have been asking for remote and flexible work opportunities for decades. This is nothing new. It happened to be that 2020, I think, forced everybody to allow that. We didn't have a choice, and so I think it is a matter of, as well, if you want to quote unquote stay ahead, and accommodate your employees to the best ability, listen to accommodation requests that might be coming through. I think that's kind of a trend that's happened along the way, where for a long time, people with disabilities were asking for standing desks. And then it became just, hey, standing desks might just be something that's better for our health overall. And so now it was the other majority, and people without disabilities as well wanted this. And so now it became something that a lot of companies are just offering standard to individuals. I don't know, remote work wise, but at least when we were back in the office, same thing for ergonomic office equipment. A lot of companies have benefits and perks around, and discounts for ergonomic office equipment, where again, that was requested, started by a lot of people with disabilities that had a need for it. But now it's something that I think to a degree everybody has a need for and could benefit from. So flexible work schedules is the same thing.
Yes, and the important thing is, hopefully you do have a formal accommodations program, and that program is visible, right? Visible to your employees. They know where to go. We now have a global accommodations tool. I'm so proud of Accenture, right? And I know there's a lot of work that went into it, but a global accommodations tool that just streamlines the whole process. But if you're not, I'm not saying Accenture's done this, but if you're not out front about it, if you're not, making it accessible and available and visible,
Yeah.
folks don't know where to go. They don't know what to ask for. They don't know what they don't know, right? I go back to that.
It's true. And not every employee knows even what their company's accommodation process statement team is. So there's always an opportunity. I mean, over communicate. Like anything else in life, it never hurts to over communicate. Send out that information over and over throughout the year. If you are in a position of leadership or HR as well, where you can impact policies, again, connect with your accommodations team to find out, is there a trend in certain accommodations that are being asked for, especially now that we are in that remote work environment? And I think employers are still trying to figure out, how do we accommodate our employees? What are their needs? How do we stay ahead of the curve, and really just get to our employees proactively? But that can also be a question that you ask on your survey as well, for even that level of inclusion. What is something that our company could be providing from even a mental health standpoint to support you from a mental health standpoint? I know that's a huge topic right now, but ask, and maybe you'll receive an overwhelming number of similar responses to something. You essentially have your employee base as kind of this survey pool of candidates that you can ask for. And I would like to think there's probably a lot of diversity, especially within larger organizations, just because it's a larger number of people. So you can get their perspectives on, what could we be doing better? And is this something that we can kind of pave the way for as well, that other organizations are trying to start to do, but now we can start to do proactively? But we are just about at time. So Laurie, I wanted to thank you again. I wanted to take this time to thank you for everything that you shared today, for the incredible work that Accenture is doing for you and your research team, that all that you are doing for us to be able to have these conversations with our own organizations and show the data and the numbers that are out there, especially for something like the perception reality gap. I think that's so important.